Welcome to A Few Minutes with Peter Grandich. I'm your host, Al O'Grady, and for the next few minutes, we'll be talking to Peter, getting his insights on the markets, commodities, business, politics, sports, and life in general. Peter Grandich is the editor of the Grandich Letter, which was first published back in 1984. He has been a market strategist, portfolio manager of 4 hedge funds, a mutual fund that bared his name, and is widely known for his accurate forecasts and no-hedge markets perspective. He appears regularly on television and radio and is widely quoted in leading financial publications. He's also the co-founder and managing member of Trinity Financial Sports and Entertainment Management Company, an insurance and estate planning firm specializing in servicing professional athletes and entertainers. As always, Peter, welcome back to the program.
Good to be back, Al.
And belated Happy New Year to you.
Same to you and your listeners.
Okay, and on that note, Peter, as we usher in a new year, the Fed certainly made an impact on the markets last week. I thought we would combine your outlook with what the government is doing and how one affects the other. So having said all that, first off, I want to get your general overall assessment of the markets. Where do you see us going for 2013? And also what impact, if any, the Fed has been having. So let's start with the U.S. stock market.
Okay, my first overall view is entitled in the New Year's newsletter was 2013, the year the chickens come home to roost, and that is on the belief that for the many years we've headed down a road that I said last year we've reached the point of no return and have now surpassed it, is to see a lot of that finally hit us in the face sometime in 2013. It was interesting to have said that, and just a couple of days later, the Fed minutes came out, which was somewhat blown out of proportion. It started with that there were some Fed members questioning whether or not what has come to be known as quantitative easing should continue. It didn't even note who they were. It could even be non-voting members of the Fed. But nevertheless, it was, the shot heard across the world in the financial markets. And to start with, as you said, with the stock market, it was actually viewed positive because the market, has rebounded and gone up since then. And the thinking was that if that's the case, then the economy isn't doing that bad. And if the economy isn't doing that bad, stocks should do okay. Or at least that's what I think the market would assume based on its reaction. But I think what's important to understand is, at least from my view, is that the Fed has painted itself into a corner and in no way, shape, or form can actually do what it hinted. And the reason I say that is last year alone, 60% of the debt that the United States created in order to continue running at these, terrible deficits was purchased by the Fed. And so if the Fed stops its program of buying U.S. government debt, my question to everybody out there is, who's going to pick up the slack? And the answer, quite frankly, is no one. And so even if they were able to do what they hinted they may do, we will have to see much, much higher interest rates, which will actually defeat the purpose of all the reasons they did this program to begin with. So I think it was a lot of smoke and mirror news, and there's no reality in it. Because the reality is there's no easy way out of the problems, both fiscally and monetarily. But for the very short term, meaning for the foreseeable future in matters of days and weeks, I still think the stock market is going to work its way higher because the Fed is still in a very positive mode historically by creating money and cheap money as it is. And the don't worry, be happy crowd will take advantage of it. And I still believe we're going to make a marginal new all-time high that will create a media blitz about it, but that would probably be the time when the bell rings and start to look negatively on the market, but not before then.
Peter, you had asked the question, I'm not sure if it was rhetorical in nature, but just as you asked it, there was an answer that popped in my head. Who's going to pick up the slack? My first gut reaction was China. I mean, how much of the debt can they actually be financing? And I guess secondly, I mean, if you follow that, it'd be interesting to know what actual percentage of U.S. debt does China actually hold?
Well, the United States actually owns the largest single percentage of its own debt. China's a major buyer. Japan's another major buyer. But then neither of those countries are in a position to take up an immediate 60% more, nor would they want to. And if they wanted to, they would certainly want some concessions from the government for doing so. And one of those concessions would be much higher interest rates. So to answer the question originally and to respond to responding is the fact is that it sounds good, but there is no way, and there are others like Jim Sinclair and all that I concur with, that the quantitative easing to affinity is here to stay because there's no way out of it, and they're in the corner. And that's also why I believe 2013 is the year things finally come home to roost, because the recognition of that is quickly being recognized. And when it hits the average person in the street who continues to really not understand or not care of how dire the situation is, even though this fiscal cliff brought up some momentary anger from the people in the street, and we're angry and let's get rid of all these people in Congress and all, but that died down once the latest Band-Aid was done. But I really think what's going to get interesting is when the debt ceiling argument comes up, and that's due in a matter of weeks. So I think the stock market can still rise, but I would not be surprised that the debt ceiling news coincides with the peak in the stock market.
Okay, moving on. I have to assume what the Fed has been doing continues to play right into the hand of what you've been saying for some time, and that is that bonds will be the worst investment for the next decade. Would you still agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, let's just say the Fed could do what they said they could do, and they can ease back from purchasing these bonds. That would suggest that the economy is getting stronger. If the economy is getting stronger, interest rates are going to rise. Now, you would then say, well, if they're not going to do what they said they do, then interest rates should stay low. Well, they've only gotten away with what they're doing by creating all this money because right now the perception up until now is that it can continue endlessly without any real payment, that we can just run deficits forever, keep printing money with no payment for it. The day is going to come, the day of reckoning, as many like to call it, is going to come when that's no longer the case. And I've said now for I don't know how long, we've seen a preview of how that happens because it happened in Europe. Many countries in Europe were doing the same thing America's been doing. We're running large-scale deficits, was printing more and more money to spend, and their spending went up and to levels that people got so used to the government doing everything for them. And then one day it was concluded by the markets that those governments are not going to be able possibly to pay back the debt, and their rates went through the roof on their bonds, even though their economies had, grinded to a halt. You can take Greece as the most recognized case in that situation, and that's what's coming to America. It's only a question of when, not if, and therefore bonds are just going to get absolutely creamed when that day comes. And I really truly believe that day has already started to develop and is going to hit us sometime in 2013.
Okay, moving on. Certainly a topic that's very near and dear to your heart, and of course that's gold. Is the mother of all gold bull markets still intact, or did the Fed move take some wind out of its sail?
I think it's fair to say some of the wind was taken out of the sail from it. Just as last year we saw gold swoon in December and even into early January, and there were a whole host of predictions then that the bull market was over. But a few months later, gold was moving higher again and managed to gain again for 2012. I think is pretty much the same case for this year. The bearishness is increasing every day. I should actually develop some sort of email indicator of emails I get. Almost an hour doesn't pass with somebody sent me an email, either somebody else noting that they've turned bearish on gold, or some of the old constant criers, who have drawn lines in the sand from 300 up, like Nadler and Gottman and others. And when those emails reach a feverish peak, we usually have reached the most oversold condition, and gold rebounds again. So I don't see any of the things that have changed. I see things as compelling as they've done before. And I think after a slow start like we had last year, gold will move higher into the spring and summer.
Any number you want to use as far as a forecast for this year?
One of the good news for anybody interested in buying gold is that they can really take a very safe play now, and they would have to give up about $150 in gains right now because we're around $1,650. But if and when gold closes a couple times above 1,800, I am almost as certain as I'm certain the New York Jets won't win the Super Bowl next year, that gold will take off and just fly towards 2,000. So don't buy anything until you see it above 1,800. I do think we are still in a 1,500 to 1,800 trading range. And when you're in such defined long-term ranges, you look to buy the bottom of those ranges and sell the tops until things change. And now we're smack in the middle of that range. So if you're anything other than very long-term, wait till either it gets lower to the lower edge or it breaks above the key resistance, or else do nothing.
Okay. You always like to say that the U.S. dollar is terminally ill. Did the Fed create a wonder cure for this thing?
Well, in the sense that the assumption normally in old normal times was that if the Fed has stopped easing, means rates are going to go higher, which would normally benefit the dollar. But I put up a chart a couple of days ago on my blog, and I said, if you can find any bullishness in this, please tell me. And it was the 20-year chart of the U.S. dollar. No, it's on that campaign, and when that day of reckoning comes, trust me, the dollar will be banged just as the currencies of those countries were, or the euro was, when the so-called you-know-what hit the fan there. And so, the U.S. dollar is meandering in a very small trading range. Neither bull or bear can raise their head and say, see, I told you so. But it's still, from a longer term, in a tremendous downtrend and can only head lower as America just continues to pile on the debt, continues to have spending and entitlements out of control, and really has become a battle in the U.S., and I speak just of the U.S., of a battle between the makers and the takers. And the takers seem to be gaining control. And once that clearly becomes universal across the United States, then and only then I think people will realize that we become just like socialism seen in certain European countries, and there's going to be no really way to service it unless we just totally dilute our money and create money even more so than we do now, or the austerity that everybody will feel we need but never gets implemented, just like it hasn't been implemented in Europe, because it's too hard for people to accept, and no government politician will have the you-know-what to go forward with it.
Leading up to the New Year's Day, when the fiscal cliff was front and center, I wasn't watching the charts as far as the U.S. dollar was concerned. Was there any sort of correlation?
It was so minute, and the dollar's been such a tight trading range. The U.S. dollar index, which perhaps is not the best index because it's overweighted by the euro, where the Morgan Stanley trade-weighted dollar is best. But if we use the U.S. dollar index, it's really been trading just between 79 and 81 for months on end. So it's really gone nowhere fast, either up or down.
Now, does that surprise you? Because, with all the news with the fiscal cliff, you would think that would have some sort of impact in terms of, the future value of the U.S. dollar when you're talking about the U.S. dollar index.
I just think there's too much uncertainty for the currency traders to really make a big bet. They did try last year, if you remember, to break the euro. There were so many articles 6 months ago where the euro was going to disappear. It was going to go down to par with the U.S. dollar. It was trading in the low 120s, and here, today we're at 130 or plus. And so I just think this is one of those point of times where if you ever watched a football game, they seem to be stuck between the 40-yard lines, and that's where we are. Something will eventually move it one way or another. Obviously, I think the crisis taking real fold will push the dollar down as we get into the latter part of this year, but for now, there's just no trend.
Okay, here we are into January. It's certainly heating season, full gear. Let's talk about oil and natural gas. Oil and natural gas peaking right now as far as you're concerned?
Oil has great support in the mid-80s, gets sold above 100. Natural gas, despite, typically, winter here, really has no big run anymore because there's such ample supply of it and continuously new discoveries of it, and there's no fear of any shortage of it. So those are just two markets now that are very trapped in a range, and until something changes dramatically on the fundamentals, it's going to go nowhere fast, and that's why I don't pay much attention to them, nor do I think they're going to have any real impacts on the general markets.
You're saying you're not paying an awful lot of attention to them. Are you following the story regarding fracking and producing natural gas? And does that kind of catch your attention?
Yeah, it does, and there's a great debate in it, but fracking is obviously the thing that has brought so much more ample supply on. It'll probably take, and it's terrible, and I hope it don't happen, but it will probably take a terrible accident that can be directly related to fracking to get some concerns or politicians feeling they have to stand up against it. But behind closed doors, they kind of like it because much more cheaper, ample supply of energy, if can keep energy prices down, doesn't get the public uproaring, and keeps the politician in the place where they want to be, and that's in their position. So unless something really shows and some terrible earthquake happens and it can be directly related to fracking, I just see that still moving forward overall.
I would think that the United States would want to embrace that sort of technology, because I think every presidential administration since the Carter administration has always been talking about getting the U.S. off of Middle Eastern dependence or Middle Eastern oil. And natural gas is certainly a viable alternative, and especially if they have it in their own backyard, you would think that they would want to develop these sorts of technologies.
They have, and that's why farmlands where guys were going broke in Pennsylvania and New York suddenly have saved their farms and actually have gotten wealthy again because of all the the new drilling for gas and oil using fracking. So I just see that continuing unless something, like I said, tragically happens on such a universal scale.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, we've taken a look at the markets from a big picture perspective. Let's kind of narrow our focus somewhat on individual companies. Any companies on your radar right now, Peter, that you'd like to share?
Well, I guess I'll just go through the ones that I've always done, and my hope is in this upcoming show in Vancouver next week where I travel to, I'll be able to see the companies firsthand and get an up-to-the-minute analogy, but it's more of the same. Again, as I said in my own writings, I don't expect the junior resource market to be, dramatically moving to the upside still for at least a few more months. It was a very painful, hard-hit bear market that basically is behind us, but not yet repaired enough to allow dramatic moves up. So I don't think we're going to see, just a general rise in that market. There's still a lot of companies with, pennies a share, with too many shares outstanding that have to be consolidated, and financings are still quite difficult to do. But having said that, babies with the bathwaters got tossed out, and there's still a lot of companies doing a lot of good work. This morning, one of my largest personal holdings and a client I've always spoken very highly of, Alderon Iron Ore, came out with very, very good news on their studies, and that's a company that's turned the corner. I think all the iron ores have turned the corner because the iron ore price has rebounded dramatically. I think there's projects that have gone past whether or not they're going to be successful, and it's just a matter of them moving towards actual production that will bring them in a different type of shareholders and a re-rating. I think a prime example of that is Donna Metals. And then there's a few exploration-oriented companies that have advanced projects that just continue to look very promising, but they're not getting any valuation put on the potentials of millions of ounces, whether that's geologic exploration, Sunridge Gold, or Spanish Mountain Gold. I think all of them have projects that are most likely going to become mines. In some cases, they have multiple projects that will come mines. And, last but not least, I just think that we have to understand that how bad this bear market was, I know because, I saw a seven-figure drop in my worth owning these things, and I never thought as a young man I'd even have a seven-figure net worth. So even at age 56, that takes some accustomed to getting used to. and I just don't think we're going to get an opportunity where that all is going to be made up in a day or a week or a month. But we've seen the worst, and so I think it's a matter of base building, and then probably sometime in the spring and summer we'll finally be in a position where any moves up can sustain themselves.
Okay. That's it as far as formal questions, Peter. Let's have some fun. Let's football season. We're in the playoffs. Your Jets, your Giants, my Cowboys, they're not there, but football still goes on. Give us your predictions for these 4 games.
Well, I pretty well think that a lot of, and when you talk to players, which I get an opportunity to through the blessing of my other business, a lot of it is all about momentum and who's peaking and who's playing well at the moment. And it's very hard not to look past Seattle and say that this is a team that's firing on all engines, has both a high-quality offense and defense, and it's just doing the right things now, and everything seems to be set in its gear. So it would not surprise me. I would love to see at least one rookie quarterback, in the Super Bowl. I think that's just a great story in itself. I do think over in the other conference, the battle obviously is going to come down between Brady and Manning, and I just think in the end this is Denver's year. I'm a little bit more suspect on New England's defense than obviously Denver. So those would be the 2 teams I would like to see in the Super Bowl. Obviously everybody has their own choices, and only a couple can make it. But I just think those are Seattle and Denver right now are the teams that are playing at the best. But this is not a cop out. To me, the best quarterback in the NFL, as great as Manning and everything is, given what he has to play with, is Aaron Rodgers. I mean, if Green Bay ever had a defense, that they would be viewed as Tom Brady, basically Green Bay's offense is somewhat unstoppable without even a great running back. But at the end, it's either Denver or Seattle in my book.
Yeah, you know what? Hard to argue with that. I was going to say that Seattle is certainly the sleeper pick, but you know what? New England, they just seem to keep winning, and it's not fancy.
One thing they got going for them is they don't have to play the Giants.
Well, you know what? The Giants had to play the Redskins, and they ran into a hot team at that point. And, the Redskins, they prevailed, but not the first round of the playoffs, and they moved on. Listen, here, of course, football, big news in the U.S., big news here in Canada on the sports front. The hockey labor situation has been settled. Have you been following that? Do you find the business of sports, piquing your interest?
Hockey players are the least egotistical of all players that I deal with. Believe me, they really are more grounded to the earth than dealing with football, baseball, and especially basketball players. But just because of sports in general and the disregard, I believe, ownerships and players have had to the people who actually make their money, the fans, I wish no one went to a game. But that ain't going to happen. But it would just be, for both sides, a hard lesson to recognize that, I just think things are getting out of hand. I mean, here, for a family, it's very difficult to afford to go to a major sporting event.
You can't. You can't. It's all corporate. It's corporate seasons tickets. No, a family of 4. There's no way that they can afford that.
And one of the reasons why minor league baseball has done so well as a business in the States is baseball has basically priced out families other than once in a blue moon going. The other thing that I think the Jets hopefully will cause a change in, but I doubt it will have anything long-lasting, and that's these PSLs, to actually charge people who are season ticket holder a licensing fee just to have the right to have that ticket. I mean, that's just, I think that's the most disgusting thing that's happened in sports, PSLs. But that's where things had gone, and but eventually these guys can price themselves out of the business. And in some ways, and I don't want a hockey discussion, it's certainly not my area of expertise, but in some ways I think the owners started to realize that my God, if we start, it's our fault because we started paying these things, but we could get to the point where we'd have to pay so much we won't end up getting people to sit in the stands. So we'll see.
Yeah. So you're going to Vancouver next week. Are you going to be wearing a Vancouver Canucks jersey?
No, I did that last year, even though I didn't have to. And people who know me know I never said a bad thing about the Canucks all last year, even though I had, every reason to. But I have taken this, model of, what, I don't say anything about the Canucks anymore. God willing, these poor souls there will, get a team, and maybe with an asterisk season where, they only play half the season, maybe this is the year they finally do it.
Okay. Peter, as always, I thank you very much for your time, and I look forward
to... Was I talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs? I forgot. Hold on.
Oh, no. We wanted to talk about a hockey team.
Okay.
There's an old joke here in Canada. How can you tell when it's Thanksgiving?
How?
The Leafs are mathematically eliminated from the playoffs.
That's a good one.
So feel free to share that with your friends in Vancouver.
Okay.
On that note, Peter, as always, thanks very much for your time, and look forward to talking with you in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Al.
Okay. And this interview appears on my website, corporateinterviews.com. It can also be accessed on YouTube and iTunes. Just type in Grandich in those respective search engines to not only access this interview, but interviews that we've done in the past. Now, if you have any questions for Peter, by all means, send me an email. My email address, very simply, al@corporateinterviews.com. We'll certainly do our best to mention it on our next program. For Peter Grandich, I'm Al O'Grady. Thanks very much for joining us.